All right, welcome everybody. Think we still have some folks rolling in, but we are going to go ahead and get started in consideration of everybody's time. Just want to take a moment right quick to introduce myself. My name is Katie Hawk, I'm the Executive Director of the Oklahoma Monarch Society. And we also have Marcus Long with us today. He's going to be our presenter and talk with you about all the technical details in regards to submitting your application. In 10 minutes, in regards to submitting your applications for the Wildlife Habitat Grant Program. This is an exciting time for us. This is our second year for the program. Last year we had it and were able to offer grants to residents in Oklahoma, Canadian, and Cleveland counties. We know we've gotten a lot of feedback, folks requesting other locations to be served, and we completely appreciate and understand your desires, and we hope to be able to continue to expand this program going forward. For 2026, the grant is available to Grady, Logan, Oklahoma, and Tulsa County residents and businesses. So with that in mind, if you're in a different county, no, you will not be able to apply this year. Your application will not be eligible. Again, we hope to continue to grow the program for in the future to be able to accommodate other folks throughout the state. We do have limited funding and we do have limited staffing. We are very much steadfast on quality habitat, and to do so, that does provide technical assistance along the way. And so it makes it a little difficult for us to be able to serve everyone statewide at one time with our limited capacity. Also, with the limited funding that we have, we want to ensure that those, again, coming back to quality habitat, that we're able to provide the adequate amount of funding to create quality habitat. We don't want to spread that funding too thin. So I hope everybody can understand, and we are going to do our best to get this program into your county as well if you're not in one of those 4 counties. All right. So with that in mind, we do want to take a moment and thank our donors who have made this program a possibility. This is all with private funding. There is no government funding for the grant program. And we are very grateful to the Kirkpatrick Foundation, who has been our spearhead donor from day one, from the first year that we last year in 2025, the first year that we launched this program, and they are still continuing to support this program, and we're very grateful to the Kirkpatrick Foundation. In addition, the Oklahoma Monarch Society is also a donor, as well as the Oklahoma Native Plant Society. So we're very grateful. Thank you so much to our friends at the Monarch Society and at the Native Plant Society. We hope to continue growing this program. If you work for an entity or have friends who do that you think might like to donate and support this program, we are in the process of generating a third-party fund that will allow for anyone to contribute in the world that wants to contribute and support this fund program or this habitat. That fund will be available beginning next year. If you're not muted, please mute yourselves. We're getting a lot of feedback here. Okay. All right. With that in mind, I do want to take a moment to orient you with today's format and a button in your screen there. Somewhere in your interface, you'll see a chat bubble, a little chat bubble icon. Go ahead and click it. Get your chat screen ready, okay? When you have a question, that is how you will submit it, is through the chat. Whenever Marcus is completed with his presentation, we will take pause and go through the questions, and the ones that have not been answered yet, we will take a moment and visit each one of those so he can get you clarity on your inquiry. So with that in mind, I want to introduce Marcus Long. He is an urban conservationist for the Oklahoma Conservation Commission. He's also the wizard behind the technicalities and the requirements of this program. We're really grateful to Marcus to help build the infrastructure of what those requirements look like, you know, all the little nuances and about it, why we have so many specific types of plants, the density rate, etc. And we're really grateful to Marcus for taking his time and investing that into this program. So big thank you to Marcus on that. He's going to go over all the grant requirements, and then after that, we will take some time to answer questions. So I'm going to go on mute, and we're going to turn this over to Marcus.
Okay, thanks, Katie. And thanks everybody for being here. Like Katie said, my name is Marcus Long. I work with the Oklahoma Conservation Commission. And yeah, basically what I do is I'm just kind of a state subject matter expert. You know, I work on different projects. This is one of my favorites that I get to work on. But essentially, I just kind of provide input, mostly as it pertains to horticulture and soil health. You know, that's kind of my background. And so municipalities and individuals can reach out to me and receive that technical assistance. Here on my first slide, I got kind of a banner of all our partners. We have the Oklahoma Association of Conservation Districts, that's OACD, Oklahoma Monarch Society and the Okies for Monarchs program, Kirkpatrick Foundation, Oklahoma Native Plant Society, and then myself, the Oklahoma Conservation Commission. And I know we've said those twice already, but I really just wanted to highlight, programs like this, that they take a village to make happen. Katie gave me a really kind introduction. But the truth of the matter is, I'm a scientist and my background is science. And if it were up to me to get the word out about this program, I would really struggle. We really lean on Oklahoma Monarch Society and OACD to get the word out about the program, to kind of organize all the thoughts. So we all play a role, and it's all, it takes a village to lift something like this up. Not on that banner of partners is one more partner that I want to highlight, and that is you all here, the applicants, the people who are going to receive this award. That's really how we approach it and how we look at it, is that we are partnering with you in order to put the wildlife habitat on the ground in urban and suburban areas. And you guys, we're kind of we're the administrators, right? And you guys are the labor. We're counting on you guys to kind of to provide the labor and the passion to kind of really put conservation on the ground, which is the ultimate goal of this program. All right, let's jump into it. All right, so here's a little bit of an overview of what we're going to be talking about. So first, we're going to cover what is the Wildlife Habitat Grant Program. We'll talk about the timeline, from application all the way to closing your project. We'll talk about how to apply. We'll talk about what are the grant requirements, including the planting requirements. And then we'll talk about what does implementation and reimbursement look like. And as we're flipping through these, we'll see some pictures from projects from last year. Like Katie mentioned, this is our second year to do this program, and so that means we got a good pile of pictures from last year of just right after they were implemented, and we were certifying the completion of those projects. So here's the first one. This is at my friend Kate's house. Okay, so what is the Wildlife Habitat Grant Program? So the Wildlife Habitat Grant Program is a reimbursement program for homeowners, businesses, schools, parks, religious institutes, and the list goes on. Really, this program is targeted at, like I mentioned, at urban and suburban areas, and when I say urban, I mean that broadly. You don't have to live in downtown OKC or Tulsa in order to be considered urban. I'm talking about little towns, even like Guthrie, or even Orlando, in Orlando, Oklahoma, and Logan County. If you live in town, then you're urban, and so that's really who the target audience of this program is. And also, I do want to highlight one word in that statement, and that is this program is reimbursement. So we don't give any payment up front. I think that's good for folks to know. Wish we could give payment up front, but as the program is structured right now, it is upon completion of your project, you get reimbursement. And that reimbursement rate is $525 per 100 square feet with a minimum project size of 100 square feet. So we only pay in 100 square foot increments. And we pay, that number, that $525 number, it's not arbitrary, and that we came up with that based on what the costs that we thought it would take in order to meet the diversity and density requirements of the grant program. And we'll talk a little bit more about those as we get down the line, but I just really wanted to mention that number is it's not arbitrary, that we really did want to come up with a figure that allowed people to install high quality wildlife habitat. And so for residential projects, there's a minimum of 100 square feet and a maximum of 500 square feet. And for public spaces like businesses, nonprofits, parks, religious institutes, the maximum is 1,000 square feet. And so our most frequently asked question is, the it's actually probably the one Katie said at the beginning is this isn't in my county, but can I still apply? But then our second most frequently asked question is, I'm a residential, I'm applying for my house, but I want to apply for more than 500 square feet. And the answer to that, unfortunately, is no, you have to stay under that 500 square foot maximum if the primary use of your project is at a residential location. Even if you operate a business out of that residential location, we're still going to ask you to stay under that 500 square foot mark. And the reason for that is that we want to spread this money as much as we can. And then also, I think it's worth mentioning that, because of funding limitations, we're only going to offer, there's only going to be a couple really big projects awarded. We want to fund as many smaller residential projects as we can. And so your project will actually probably be more competitive if you're on residential and it's a little bit on the smaller side. I just think that's worth mentioning. Those bigger projects, we just weigh those a little bit heavier. I don't want to say they're graded more harshly. That's not necessarily true. But they have a harder time meeting like the feasibility marks that we want to see in an application. And so sometimes those smaller projects, it's just easier for us to say yes to them. And so they end up scoring a little bit higher. They're lower risk, I think is what I'm trying to say. And so I'm not telling you how to apply. You should apply for the project that you have in mind, but I would just keep in mind the old adage that a bird in the hand is better than two in the bush sometimes. Like we've said a couple times already, this program is available in Oklahoma, Grady, Logan, and Tulsa County. I really feel for those that are right on the line, of one of those counties, but we are going to stick to that and only accept applications from those counties. And I would say, be careful too that I'm thinking of Oklahoma City. I live in Oklahoma City, so I'm thinking of that and how Oklahoma City is a huge city that bleeds into like 4 counties. But in spite of those city lines, we're really going to stick to the county lines. And then lastly, this last note is just another mention of the funders and some of the implementation partners. Okay, so let's look at our grant timeline. So applications opened at the beginning of July, but they'll close on August 2nd. So that's a Sunday, and they'll close at midnight. So just get your application in before that. You still got plenty of time, about 2 more weeks. And then we're going to really, after we get all those applications, that's when the hard work really starts for our implementation team. Because we get so many applications, it really does take us a little bit of time to go through and score each of those applications. And I wanted to just quickly mention that, as part of my job, I have the opportunity to work on so many different programs. And the Wildlife Habitat Grant Program, I think it has the most solid and unbiased selection process. It's completely anonymous. I don't know who's scoring whose application. They don't know they know which applications they're scoring, but they don't know the names. They don't know the people that they're scoring. And then each application is actually scored by 2 different people. So I'm one of the reviewers. I'm only going to score for every application I review. I can only give it half of its score. So because of that, the energy that we put into making this program, the selection unbiased, it does take us a while. So we'll be hard at work over the month of August, trying to do our best to make those selections. And then our goal is to announce those awards in the first week of September. We want to get projects rolling as quickly as possible. And I think it should be no issue for us to meet that goal. So we're going to announce those awards in early September. And then project habitat completion, it needs to wrap up October 31st, 2026. There really won't be much wiggle room in that deadline. So that's something else to consider. As you're applying, we really want to see, how you're getting from point A to point B and within the timeline of that's provided. So, within September and October is what I'm getting at. And then we'll distribute awards really, as soon as you certify your project is completed, we will begin the reimbursement process, but we'll be doing that all through the year. Okay, so how do you apply? So you can apply by visiting our webpage. If you're at this webinar, the chances are you've already been to our webpage. I'm just going to pull this over really quick. So this is the webpage here, and I wanted to pull this up specifically because really everything I'm saying today and this whole presentation that I'm giving, it's all based on this webpage. You know, there's no information that I'm going to share today that you can't find here. So I would really highly encourage everyone, as you're going to apply, review this page. You know, it's not that much reading. You know, it might take you a couple minutes to read from top to bottom of this thing, and it'll really give you a good feel for what we're looking for in a project and how your project might fit with what we are requiring. After you're done reading that page, you can just click this big green button to apply. If you have any questions, just reach out. You can send an inquiry to us, and we're happy to, me and a couple other people are working to answer those inquiries, and we're happy to help straighten you out. That's our pleasure. And, you know, I would say, I really want to voice that we want to help you have a strong application. You know, this is, that is the primary focus of my work over the next couple of weeks, is going to be helping as many people as possible have a strong application. So don't be shy in reaching out for help. Okay, then also just quickly wanted to mention that this picture in the middle, a friend of mine took this picture, and I use it in like all of my presentations. I just think it's so cool, that little owl sitting in a dead tree. But anyway, that's neither here nor there. I just had to point that out. Okay, so what are some tips for a strong application? You know, I really want to stress that these are not requirements. These are just tips. You know, these are just things that we, as we're going through our review process last year, we noticed that these different items listed are things that just helped applications break through. They're not required. We had many projects that were, I mean, we had projects of all different types. There was no one type of project that got funded, but we did want to share some tips with you all. So the first one is to show it off, that visibility to the public is something that is a great ad for every project. You know, that's a question that we ask in the application, is like, who is interacting with this, with your project? And I would say there were so many different creative ways that people came up with to encourage their project to be more activated. But the easiest way is really if you're doing it in your front yard. You know, that is the easiest way to increase visibility for a residential location. Okay, shovel ready. So that's what we're talking about. Shovel ready is like, it's ready to have plants put into it. You know, a non-shovel ready project might look like it's currently Bermuda lawn. You know, a shovel ready project would be, it's an empty garden bed that's ready to be planted, or maybe it's an area that's currently being solarized. You know, those are kind of the what I would call a shovel ready project. The next point is an accurate reflection of project size. So as part of my job and a lot of our implementation team, you know, we spend a lot of time writing grants, you know, for programs like this one and others. You know, we have to raise funds for these programs. And whenever you see a grant, you know, your first instinct is like, okay, how much are they offering? And how do I get that much money? You know, and I would say that's natural. I do that. That's kind of how you should approach it, maybe. But I would say for this grant, we really do want to see like that you've thought about the size of your project. You know, if we feel like, well, this person just applied for the maximum and they didn't really think out like how they were going to get from point A to point B, that may end up hurting your application more than it's helpful. So I would say just really be honest with yourself about what you can accomplish within the implementation period, and then like the actual size of what your project is going to be. Don't just guess. We want to know as accurately as possible the size of your project, and then in 100 square foot increments. Okay, project feasibility. So this is like realistic scope within the grant timeline. And for me, this is maybe the most important thing to understand. And as we're reviewing applications, this is really what we're trying to see is how is this person, as part of your grant application, you're required to submit a before picture. So we're going to look at that before picture, and we want to come to an understanding of how you're going to get that picture to wildlife habitat. And so no matter what that area looks like, we just want you to describe, how are you going to prepare that site? What plants are you going to plant? If you're going to have help, who's going to help you? How are you going to maintain that site? All of these things are of crucial importance for us to score your application. And then moving on down the list, working with the professional associated with the Oklahoma Native Plant Network. So the Oklahoma Native Plant Network, this is it's a professional group of landscapers, nursery owners, landscape designers, and other landscape professionals that specialize in native plants. And all these people that are associated with the Oklahoma Native Plant Network, they grow organically. They know their stuff. They're not faking it. And so we just wanted to highlight them and encourage people to engage with the people, the professionals that are part of that group. You don't have to get your plants from them. If I'm thinking of a farm in Logan County called Verdant Farms. They sell native plants. They're not part of Oklahoma Native Plant Network. If you buy plants from them, that's completely fine. But we just wanted to point you all to this resource. And then the last one is be detailed. And I really want to mention here that as I've been looking through applications as they come in, it's kind of been a little startling to me how much the world has changed, even just in a year since the last time we did this. And, so many applications are influenced by AI. That's the way of the world. I think if you use AI to help write your application, that's fine. That's completely fine. But the reason I bring this up is that I really feel like AI is really, really good at word salad. It puts a lot of words into something without really saying much. And we don't need an AI response. We need the human detail. If you want to use AI to clean up your application, I think that's fine. But I would just say that, a lot of words, if you have a lot of words, just make sure that they're driving at something like, and some of those crucial details is something that we're going to look for, the plants that you're planting, how you're preparing your site, all the things that I've mentioned throughout this presentation. Those are the things that we really, really need to know. And as a reviewer, I'm going to try to look past the flowery language and find the substance. So I would encourage you to focus on that. Okay, let's talk a little bit about requirements. We're kind of going to get into the meat and potatoes of the presentation now. So just quickly moving through these, we've mentioned the counties that kind of make up the locality of this project. We've talked about the size requirements, but in that number 2 bullet, I want to mention one other thing, and that is this project is meant to fund new wildlife habitats. So if you're planting into an existing native bed, that would not qualify for this program. We want to see the installation of a new garden. Now, if you're adding a new installment onto an existing garden, that's fair game. Or if you're removing ornamental plants, let's say you got a garden that's like a bunch of boxwoods, and you're going to remove those boxwoods and plant native plants. That's all fair game, but you just can't be planting into an existing garden. Number 3, the installation of plants must occur during our implementation period, which is September through October. If you installed a native garden in spring and you want to receive reimbursement for that as part of this program, that will not be allowable. You have to be starting and finishing your project in September and October. Number 4, these are one-time fund. This is one-time funding per location. So a person can apply more than once. There's no problem with that necessarily, but we're only going to fund projects on a particular piece of property one time. So, for example, this picture to the right here, this is my friend Ben, and he owns a property. It's a little farm. It's called Ralph's Ranch, and they were part of this grant last year. They installed that wildlife habitat that's pictured there. It's beautiful. I love Ben. I wish him the best, but we won't fund his a project on his property again, right? And then the last thing is that the Wildlife Habitat Grant Program does not fund projects that rely on seed and will only support projects using potted plants as the primary plant material for establishing new wildlife habitat. So we had a lot of people apply last year that they were really looking for funding for like a large scale restoration project that kind of relied on seed, which is great. I mean, we would encourage people to do that, but really, this program is meant for projects that are planting plant starts. And as part of your certification process, we want plants to be large enough to identify. They got to be like, they can't just be a seed under the ground, right? They got to be up and identifiable in order to certify your project. And, I wanted to mention too, just on a last note on the size requirement, that there's a ton of great projects out there that are large scale. There are other programs associated with projects like that. And if you have a large scale project, you should reach out, and I'm happy to talk to you about some of the opportunities that exist to fund projects like that. But this, if your project's like, if you would measure it in increments of acres instead of square feet, it's probably a little out of scope for this program. And on a final note for these requirements this is really just a summarized version of what's on the webpage. This is not this is not the all-inclusive list. So I would encourage you guys to read the full requirements on the webpage. There are some other details in there that might be important to note. Okay, let's talk about planting requirements. So we do ask, just in order to meet our standards of habitat, we do ask that projects comply with our planting requirements. And those planting requirements break up into two basic categories: density requirements and diversity requirements. And so the density requirements are pretty simple. That's just, we want to see one plant planted for every 2 square feet, and we want to see at least 50 plants planted per 100 square feet. And so I would say for the density requirements, the one plant per 2 square feet, there's a little bit of wiggle room there. I'm thinking of, let's say you're planting like a 9-bark. 9-bark is a native shrub. It gets really wide. It's like, it can be like 8 by 8, it gets kind of, it's just like this big round plant. So you might plant things a little further away than 2 feet from that 9-bark, and we would accept that still. That makes good, we're a common sense crowd, and that makes good sense. But we still are going to require you to plant 50 native plants per 100 square feet. That's a pretty hard and fast rule. And then moving on to the diversity requirements. So we got a couple boxes that we have to check in order to make sure, that there's enough diversity to support wildlife. And, that's really what, so much of ecological services can be drawn back to, like good, diverse landscapes. That is just absolutely crucial to have productive wildlife habitat. And so we want to encourage that. And so we want to see in each project, we want to see 3 native blooming plants per growing season per 100 square feet. So that's spring, summer, and fall, or our growing season. So in every 100 square feet, you should have at least 3 things that are blooming at all times. We want to see 3 native host plants per 100 square feet. And then we want to see at least 1 native woody species per project. So that's not per 100 square feet. That's just per project. We want to see 1 native woody species. And I would say too, that native woody species, it doesn't have to be a tree. It can be a shrub. I'm thinking of like buttonbush might be an example of like a smaller shrub that would do well in a landscaping setting, and it would qualify as a woody species, right? And I like to kind of think of these diversity requirements as kind of like check boxes, and so we have 3 blooming plants per season. So that's 9 different check boxes. We need to check 9 different boxes to meet that blooming requirement. And then the 3 native host plants, that's 3 more check boxes. And then 1 woody species. So we have a total of 13 boxes that we have to check. And the reason I'm saying all this is because some plants may check more than 1 box. So let's say I made this grid here, and it's not very good, but it does the trick. And this is 100 square feet. Each box represents 1 square foot, and I have 50 different dots in here. And let's say this brown dot in the middle, let's say I planted a serviceberry right there. So that serviceberry is a spring bloomer. It's a host plant for, I think the red spotted purple is the, or the serviceberry is the host plant for the red spotted purple butterfly. And then it's also a woody species. So that one plant was able to check 3 different boxes. So you don't necessarily, we want to encourage as much diversity as possible, but you don't necessarily have to have 13 different plants. You can kind of have a little bit of overlap where it makes sense. And I want to mention too, really quickly, because I think it's helpful. In landscaping, they would call this spacing, they call it on 2-foot centers. So if you look at this grid and you see, well, there's only 1 box in between every plant, but the center of each plant is 2 feet apart. And that's kind of what we're looking for. We're looking for on 2-foot centers at minimum. I had somebody reach out the other day and they were like, can I plant more than 50 plants per 100 square feet? And the answer is absolutely. Doug Talmy has the quote, if you can see the ground, then your garden's not planted densely enough. And so more density is fine, but this is the minimum requirement. Okay, so what does 100 square feet look like? If you've ever been to a farmer's market or a craft fair and you saw everybody in their white pop-up canopy tents, those are usually 10 by 10, so that's 100 square feet. Also, about a half of a standard parking spot is 100 square feet. So parking spots tend to be 10 by 20. So half of that is about 100 square feet. Or you can think of like a small bathroom or a walk-in closet. Okay, let's talk through the implementation and reimbursement process. So if your project's awarded, what will happen next is you'll receive notice from one of our staff members, and basically we'll kind of pair you with an implementation staff member. We have a section of our staff who will be responsible for the implementation and the technical assistance, and basically just kind of walking you through the project, answering any questions you might have, getting your paperwork all together, things like that. And we're going to pair that person with you. Day one, we're going to say, hey, here's your person, reach out to them with any questions. And they're, like I said, they're walking you through the project. And then also, I want to mention, this is very important, that all the funds associated with this program are taxable. So before any work begins, we're going to have you submit a W-9, and then we'll also have you sign a funding agreement. And that funding agreement is basically just saying that I understand that I'm being reimbursed this much, and then I'm going to hold up my side of the deal by meeting those planting requirements. Okay, and after you've got your initial paperwork in place, you're going to get to work, and you're going to implement your project. And then once your project is completed, you'll reach out to your staff person that was assigned to you, and you'll basically ask them to come out and certify the completion of your project. We do all these certifications in person. So we'll stop by your place. We'll take some pictures. We'll leave you a yard by yard sign, and and then, that's it. That's really the certification process. It couldn't be simpler. We'll also ask you to submit all of the relevant receipts of your project. And so these receipts, they can include primarily plant material, but also other garden related purchases. So let's say you were starting from Bermuda lawn and you hired a landscape company to come dig up all the Bermuda lawn. you can submit the invoice for that landscape company as part of your receipts. Well, let's say you bought like some garden edging, or you bought some compost, or you bought some mulch. All of these things would be allowable costs. As long as it contributed to your project, then that's all acceptable costs. And we will ask you to submit receipts that equal the total of the award that you received. We need to. Of course, it doesn't have to be plants, as I was saying, but we do need receipts submitted to the total of your project. Okay, then after you submitted your receipts, you got your project certified, the next step is just to register your habitat on okiesformonarchs.org. We'll help walk you through that process, and we'll certify you in the yard by yard program. And these are just different ways that we track the impact of this program. We want to keep track of the habitat that exists within Oklahoma. So that's just one way you can help us out, is by registering your habitat. Okay. Then you receive your award. We put your check in the mail, and that comes right to your mailbox. And like I mentioned earlier, you get $525 per 100 square foot planted of wildlife habitat. Okay, that's all I got. Thank you all for listening, and I'll hang out for the next little while, and I'm happy to answer any questions that may have got through the chat.
Okay, Marcus, we do have quite a few questions, and Katie, please feel free to jump in and answer too as we go, or if you're answering in the chat as well. I will try to start at the very tip top where I didn't get to some of you. So could you, Marcus, touch on what the reimbursement would cover as far as items that are not plants, such as mulch
Yeah,
or cut
absolutely.
rentals?
Any garden related purchase can be reimbursed. That can be mulch, compost. Yeah, if you're renting a sod cutter, that's a great thing to submit reimbursement for. All of that's allowable. If you're unsure, you can just reach out and ask. We'll let you know. And I would say, last year we turned away very little. There were a couple things that we did say were non-reimbursable, but for the most part, if it connects to your garden, whether that be the installation of your garden, the creating longevity for your garden, or even education. I think we had some people buy educational signs and things like that, and all of that is allowable.
And as far as photos that can be submitted, can more than 5 photos be submitted?
Yeah, I don't think there's any cap on how many photos can be submitted. I would say most importantly, what we're looking for is we want a true before picture. And we've had a lot of people submit different garden designs and things like that, and that's helpful too. But I would say of those 5 pictures, just really or more, just really make sure that you have a solid before picture in there. I don't think that the Google form cuts you off. I think we've had people submit more than 5.
Great. And do you have to be a homeowner? We have someone asking because they have been a renter for 6 years and they don't anticipate moving.
We don't check your lease or anything. So I guess the quick and dirty answer is no, you do not have to be a homeowner. I think we even did one last year for some apartments, all got together and applied as a group, and they did some gardening behind their balconies. I would say, I would really encourage you to make sure your landlord is on board, but we're not going to check to see if you're a homeowner or anything.
What about the plants? Does everything have to be in the ground, or can it be in pots or raised beds?
Raised beds are fair game. I would say this program really isn't for potted plants. Yeah, I would say really for the most part, they need to be in the ground.
Could irrigation be included in the reimbursement?
Yeah.
And Sarah would like to know, can a PowerPoint be submitted?
Probably not. I don't think that's compatible with the Google form, and we're not going to, because we get so many applications, we really can't. And it's like I mentioned, it's completely anonymous. It'd be quite a bit of work if we had a bunch of people submitting like supplemental documents. So we're like just to our email. So we're really not going to take supplemental documents. It has to be submittable through the Google form.
But
Which
I
I don't
will
think
add, if I can expand upon that, if y'all don't mind, Sarah, just in case you're using PowerPoint to build your landscape design, you can export that as a JPEG out of PowerPoint, just as an example. So that way the JPEG image would be uploadable.
Yeah, great point, Katie.
I'm sure that the Google Forms do have a character count. Someone's asking about the character count in the answers. But
Oh, let me look real quick.
yeah, I'm not sure. I didn't build out that, so Marcus might check and see if those have a character account.
I don't think they do.
Is it possible to get approved with a smaller amount of square footage than you applied for? If you applied for 500 square feet, but funding only allows for 300 square foot, could you be approved for 300? And it might be, someone else was asking, do we know how many projects we're going to fund?
Yeah, so the answer is yes, absolutely. Because I mentioned earlier, this I'm not wagging my finger, but I mentioned the instinct to apply for the maximum amount last year, or just in general for grants. And last year we received, overwhelmingly people applied for the maximum amount. And we can't, if we funded everybody to the maximum amount, we would not fund very many projects. So what we ended up doing is we approved half of what people were asking for, or we just approved smaller amounts. So yeah, we will absolutely do that. But I will say that, just as a contingency is, we're going to, no matter what you're approved for, we'll require you to meet the planting requirements for that 100 square feet. If that makes sense. Like, you can't receive funding for 100 square feet and then plant very thinly 500 square feet. That would not qualify. We would ask you to go back and plant denser. I hope that makes sense. But to answer your question quickly is yes, some projects will be funded for a smaller amount than what they were awarded or what they requested. And then we don't know how many projects we'll fund. I mean, it's hard to say. It really depends on, it just depends on how the awards shake out.
Okay, and Gianna is asking, am I allowed to plug the ONPN service directory? I have reached out to one of the businesses on ONPN service directory, and they are providing free consultation if hired to do the install, or they charge a rate per hour to provide a garden design plan list, including plants that they have available.
Yeah, that's great.
Are you asking you're allowed to advertise for them?
Yeah, I'm not sure we understand the question, but
Yeah.
I will say we also plug them. They're one of our partners. It's linked on the webpage. We encourage people to peruse the ONPN service provider directory. It's a great resource. Taylor, I did want to bump us up to the top right quick. There was an inquiry early on, if you don't mind for a second.
Oh, no, not at all.
Somebody was asking, I haven't heard this, hadn't had this inquiry before. So Marcus, we're going to need your help here. It's property with the city of Tulsa. They don't have a W-9. Can they still apply? Mm-hmm. Or do they have to apply as an individual because it's city of Tulsa property?
So I responded to that question.
Oh, I'm sorry.
No, it's okay. I think I may have to ask Rebecca about that, because a W-9 is something that the recipient just has to fill out so that we can pay them. It's a tax thing for us, so that when we file our taxes, we have a W-9 for someone that we paid. So I think that would be a question for Rebecca, because if the city of Tulsa can't give us a W-9, then that would be the issue.
Can they provide an EIN number, or does it's like what LLCs get? You know what I mean, Taylor?
So because the city of Tulsa is a government entity, that's what I'm unsure of. And again, I'm not the brains behind our financial operations, so I would have to ask Rebecca.
Okay. Did we get that person's contact information to follow up with them?
Let me go up here.
And then there is somebody with their hand raised. I believe you might have been a latecomer. If you have a question, please type it in the chat, and we're managing the inquiries that way, please. And then Amanda St. Clair also asked if we have an example of a grant application or a grant that was approved that we can share. I don't believe we're sharing out example grant applications, but Amanda, and correct me if I'm wrong, Marcus, but Amanda, I will drop a link in here that you can see example awarded projects from last year.
Yeah, and to that point, it's like this program is targeted at residential people. We're not expecting like an executive level grant application. So I would say really, I mentioned this earlier in the presentation, is that we're going to try to look through any flowery language and get to the substance of your grant. That's really our goal as reviewers. So don't feel like it needs to be anything special.
Yeah, your site designs can be hand drawn. We received some last year where folks just simply took a photo of their yard and then drew on it used their phone to edit it and drew like this is where things are going. It does not have to be super fancy. Is there Amanda's also asking if there's a typical layout for folks wanting to put the habitat in their front yard, a typical layout. Marcus, one thing I will do to assist you in this conversation you're about to have is I'm going to drop a link to a page that has example garden designs for those that might like that resource, but she's curious if there's a typical layout for front yard gardens.
Yeah, no, there's no typical layout. I think with this, we have a certain level of requirement, right? Because we want to maximize uh, ecological benefit, but we still want people to have their own creative imprint. And I'm no garden designer, and I think there's more than one way to make a garden look pretty. And I would say generally, put the tall stuff at the back, but really it's whatever you want. I mean, there's no rules aside from like we want you to stay within your city's code requirements, but yeah, no, I mean, I would say we have no design requirement.
What if you submit a plan for specific plants that are no longer available when funding comes through? Do you accept substitutions?
Yeah, of course. I mean, we're not gonna grill you that hard or anything. I mean, we more than anything, we just want to know that some thought's been put into it, and you know, yeah, there's substitutions in every single horticulture project I've ever worked on. There were plant substitutions for that exact reason. So yeah, of course that's fine. Hopefully it's obvious, but I'm realizing now that I'd never said it through this presentation, but plants have to be native. That you can't sub out Golden Alexander for non-native dill. For example, it has to be a native plant. But as long as it's native, substitutions are fine. Okay, we got them all.
Well, Marcus, there's one final question, and it's
Okay.
just, will there be plants available at the time that the spring bloom, that this, bleh, one more try. Will there be plants available at that time that will be spring bloomers as needed?
Um, yes. yes. If you're having trouble finding plants, we may be able to help you. I think here in Oklahoma City, I can't speak for some of the other areas quite as well because I live and work here in the city. But here in Oklahoma City, we have a very robust native plant community that will have plants available during fall. And then I would say too is like there are online options to purchase plants. We had projects that did that last year. As long as they're native, that's completely allowable. Yeah, and that's something that your implementation staff member that'll be assigned to your project, they can potentially help you with that. Is like if you're having a hard time finding a plant, no guarantees, but we can at least try to pull from our resources and help you find the plants you're looking for.
Okay, I think that wraps it up.
Fantastic. Well,
Oh,
thank you,
we
everyone.
have one more. I'm sorry. So one person is clarifying that native grasses are okay as long as there are also plenty of blooming plants.
Oh yeah, native grass is encouraged. We have no requirement for native grasses, but yes, please plant grasses. Absolutely.
And then Carol would like to know, can you please tell us more about the persona that may be able to help?
I'm not quite sure how to answer that. Carol, would it be okay if Carol unmuted herself and clarifies?
Like in regards to a landscape designer, someone to design your garden, pick out your plants for you.
Sorry, Carol.
She's going to email. Okay. So in case that was what she was asking about, just to reiterate again, if you want to work with some folks that are in professionals in this area that are landscapers and garden designers, that vendor list for ONPN is a great resource. We strongly encourage it if that's a direction you'd like to go.
Yeah, and if you're referencing the keep saying the implementation team, and those are just the people who are going to be with the projects as they're moving along through the process, and those are staff members from the Oklahoma Monarch Society and from the Oklahoma Conservation Commission that we work professionally in this space, and certainly don't know everything. Speaking for myself, it's what I love most about horticulture is that like it's just a bottomless pit of new things to learn. But yeah, I'm immersed in it as a professional and can walk you through some of the different challenges that you may run into with the program and with your project in general.
Yes, you do need to remove all non-natives that may be existing in the area.
I would say maybe barring like a tree.
Yeah, barring like an entire tree. That's a good point, Marcus.
Thinking like a sawtooth oak is like not a native, but if you have a really big sawtooth oak, like you don't have to cut it down or anything.
All right, well, fantastic. If you have more questions, go back to that Habitat Grant Program page on the screen, in the chat, and there is a contact form. You are welcome to submit questions there. One of our teammates will be back in touch as soon as possible. And I think that kind of does it. I feel like this is a really good, helpful session. Marcus, thank you so much. Taylor, thank you so much for helping to facilitate all the questions, and really appreciate everyone for joining us today. It's so great to see so much interest in the program. A little side note that I like to brag about, this is the first of its kind in Oklahoma. We have not really ever had a residential habitat grant program before of this nature. So we are honored to be able to provide this for you, and hope that your experience in bringing nature home is a positive one for you. And we just thank you all so much for your interest, and we look forward to getting your applications. So we'll get them in. All right, I guess and we did record the session. So we will post this on our website. Thank you, everyone.